In this Make It Once video, to filter before or after the pump? That is the question. So here I have two different mechanical fuel pumps. This one came out of Marty and this one came out of Newton, and they're a little bit different style. They're different ages. They're kind of old, but they both do the same thing. And I just kind of wanted to open them up and show you what's inside. Every time I kind of look at the fuel system and people see that my fuel filter inline is after the pump, I always get a comment, and it seems to be an argument online about before or after. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception about some of those things. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to tell you what way to do it, but taking a look and informing ourselves of what's actually going on is very helpful to make these decisions. So this one in Marty, now it's all rusted. That's because I put water through it just to clean it out. I was kind of playing around with it, so this is not actually how it came out. But what we do notice is that the fuel comes in this way, and there's this very fine screen in there, and all that crud in there. You probably can't see it too well, but it was just kind of filled with like rust and bits and pieces like you'd expect. But it stopped everything from going through. And you know, it comes through into this chamber. This chamber fills up. There's a check valve there, right? It flows one way and then goes out this way. And so the bladder is inside, and this one's not serviceable, otherwise I would open it up. So I changed my mind. I do want to cut this open and see why it failed. I'm going to start with the Dremel, and if that doesn't work, I'll move on to something bigger. I think this is pretty thin right here, so. Let's do our little investigation. First, we'll just kind of take a look at the differences, which I think are neat. So on this one, the older one, this seems like a much higher quality. These little check valves or backflow valves are made out of brass springs, which probably is much more durable as long as the spring function continues to work. And those look like they're fine. And we look at how it's designed. Looks like it was just kind of this pinch crimp or whatever system is what held the bladder in place, and then the bladder is in between a plate on top and a plate underneath, and it's all rusty down there. You know, it could just be because I put water through it, who knows, but I did kind of look at this closely. Looking at it closely, I can exactly know what happened. There's no holes in the bladder, but because it was pinched, the weak point is going to be this thin point over here on the edge. And if you see it, you follow it, it's ripped here, starting to rip. It gets smaller. And then you get here, you could see this. Hopefully the camera picks that up. This whole part right here is just ripped off. So that may have been fairly minor in the grand scheme of the pump still working. Right, it's still getting a lot of pressure change, but if the outside of that seal, the flow of the gas is just going to go right around the outside. So that looks like it's all ripped. You can see it even more on the other side. There's like that change of color, and the layers are kind of mangled up. So that's how it failed. And like I said before, these weep holes were clogged up, so fuel would come in, get around the outside, and flow down out of here. So that's the old style. That's what happened to Marty. But as you can see, it was already stopping crud from getting from the gas tank into the carb. I'll open this one up while I keep talking. So this is the other style, and this one also has a weep hole here. This one didn't fail with that type of leak. It just stopped working. I never actually opened this up to find out why. So one of the misconceptions is that somehow there's all this crud is going to come from the fuel tank because it's rusty through the lines, and it's going to damage the pump, and that's going to get into the carbs and clog everything up. But there's kind of multiple things working against that idea and misconception. All the rust is not going to flow in gas like we would imagine it flows in water. Gas has half the surface tension of water, so it's not picking up particulate matter. It's not sticking to anything. It's very high flow rate, but it just flows through and around everything. That's why pumping it is a little bit different than pumping water. So already, number one, not as much crud flows through the gas as we think. So number two, a mechanical fuel pump works with this diaphragm. And it's using a small pressure change, right? Pulls down, and then as it releases, the spring pushes and pushes back. So it's using very small, rapid pressure changes. So there's actually nothing for that rust to get stuck on. It'll just fall to the bottom of the pump, and because it's not flowing well, it's not sticking to the gas doesn't want to carry it along. Any rust that ends up in the system is just going to drop to the lowest point. So it happens in the fuel pump, happens in the lines, and then also in the carb. I've reopened the carb and found a little bit of that stuff at the bottom of the bowl. The bowl and the needles are not set up to just flow straight through. So any crud that's in the system, engineers know that this stuff happens, right? Any kind of sludge or anything is going to sink to the bottom and stay there. And it doesn't get sucked up unless we're talking about huge flow rates. And these mechanical pumps don't actually have huge flow rates. So here's another screen, right? So even in this style, there's a screen to catch everything in there. And as you can see, there's no crud in this. This is from the 70s. I looked this one up. It's an Italian make. It's been in the car functioning for 30 years probably. And all we have is this gas sludge. No rust. Now, when you put your fuel filter before the pump and that sludge clogs up the filter, we're going to have a drop in pressure. Mechanical fuel pumps, because that's what it's working on, is these little small pressures. Any big variation in line pressure before could cause a vapor lock situation. Is this going to make the pump work harder and harder, and it's just not going to function well. Now, the reason why we put fuel filters ahead of electrical pumps is because it has impellers and magnets. They're electric motors. So if you have rusty metal going through and there's a magnetic field trying to spin all these motors and all that kind of stuff, it's going to damage it. And most electric fuel pumps, the warranty will be void if you don't put a fuel filter before it. Whereas mechanical fuel pumps, there is no magnets. The rust just sinks down. There's no issue with it flowing through. And as you can see, in either case, they've designed these to deal with decades of buildup. And in this case, there is no buildup. So there's no issues. There's no issue protecting a fuel pump from rust. I'm not really sure why this one failed here. This is interesting. I thought I would find some sort of damaged membrane of some sort. So this seems to be a check valve, and this is the check valve in the other direction. Okay, that one is damaged a little bit. I can tell around the edge. I don't know if the camera picks it up. So it could be that the edges are damaged, and that fuel change just was not, the gas was probably just flowing back and forth. So I wasn't building up enough pressure. This also looks like it may have been a gasket leak or a bladder leak. I tried to take this off, but it just spins. I'm not going to spend the time to try to figure out how to completely disassemble this. I kind of thought maybe I would rebuild it, but this actually was a fairly cheap Italian make for, I think, Fiats and VWs or something like that, so it's not that important. But anyway, so hopefully this informs you a little bit of how these pumps work, that if we're talking about efficiency and all that, we don't want to filter before the pump, because it's going to reduce pressure on the intake side, and is going to cause the pump to not function as well. Pushing onto a filter allows the pump to work fine. Pulling vacuum out of the line when the gas is not flowing that well is going to be an issue. So hopefully this helps you understand why I keep my filters after the pump. That's where most manufacturers tell us to put them. If at all. These original Amazons and 140s actually didn't even have inline fuel filters. They had this style, and the engineers didn't feel that they needed it. It was only afterwards that these types of fuel pumps were being installed with this type of like porous screen that people felt they needed the inline fuel filter. In all honesty, it's probably a total overkill and doesn't make any difference whether it's an inline filter or not. So there you go. Hopefully this was beneficial.